The blood on Helena Dalton's hands had long since dried, but she could still feel its weight as she stood in the doorway of the ranch house that no longer felt like home. Her father lay buried on the hill behind the barn, and the men who had killed him were somewhere out there in the Texas wilderness, unpunished and free. It was the spring of 1878, and Fort Stockton stretched out before her under a merciless sun, a collection of weathered buildings and dusty streets that promised nothing but hardship to a woman alone. She was 22 years old, and everything she had ever known had died 3 days ago with a single gunshot. Her father, Samuel Dalton, had built this ranch from nothing, carving out a life in the harsh landscape where the Comanche Trail met the wagon routes heading west. Now it was hers, along with debts she had not known existed, cattle that needed tending, and a grief so heavy she wondered if her legs would simply give out beneath her. Helena had not cried yet. She had washed her father's body, sewn him into his best sheet, and dug his grave with blistered hands because there was no one else to do it. She had spoken words over his resting place that she could not remember now. She had walked back to the house and looked at the ledgers he kept, seeing numbers that made no sense and debts to the bank that seemed impossible. The ranch would be taken from her within the month if she could not pay. Even if she could pay, how was she supposed to run it alone? The sound of hoofbeats made her reach for the rifle propped beside the door. Her hands shook as she lifted it, and she hated herself for the trembling. But when she looked out, she saw it was just old Pete Morrison from the neighboring property, riding up with his hat in his hands. "Miss Helena," he called out, staying in his saddle. "Heard about your pa. I am sorry. He was a good man." "Thank you, Pete." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, flat and distant. "If you need anything, you just holler. My wife wanted me to tell you that you are welcome at our table anytime." She nodded, knowing she would never take him up on the offer. The Morrisons had 6 children and barely enough to feed themselves. "That is kind of you." Pete shifted in his saddle, clearly uncomfortable. "There is also, there is talk in town about you staying out here alone. People are saying it is not right, that you should go back east, maybe stay with family." "I have no family back east." That was not entirely true. There was an aunt in Philadelphia whom she had met once as a child, a stern woman who had told her father he was a fool for dragging a young girl into the wilderness. But that woman was a stranger, and Philadelphia might as well have been on the moon for all Helena knew of it. Still, a woman alone out here, it is dangerous. Those men who killed your pa, they are still out there. I know where they are. The words came out harder than she intended. She had spent the past 3 days learning everything she could. Her father had been killed over a card game in the saloon by a drifter named Jack Corrigan and his 2 brothers. They had ridden out of town before the sheriff could do anything, heading south toward the border. The sheriff had shrugged and said there was nothing to be done about men who did not stay to face justice. Helena had wanted to scream at him, but screaming would not bring her father back. Pete looked uncomfortable. "Miss Helena, you cannot be thinking of going after them yourself. That is a job for men for the law. The law is not interested." She lowered the rifle, suddenly exhausted. "Thank you for coming, Pete. Please give your wife my regards." He opened his mouth as if to say more, then thought better of it. With a tip of his hat, he turned his horse and rode away, leaving her alone again with the silence and the sun and the impossible weight of everything she had to carry. Helena went back inside and looked at the ledgers again. The numbers had not changed. She owed the bank $300, due in 4 weeks. She had $17 to her name. The cattle could be sold, but they were not hers to sell yet, not until she paid off the loan her father had taken to buy them. Everything was tied up in knots she did not know how to untangle. She thought about Pete's words, about going east, about giving up. It would be easier. She could sell what little she had, pay off what she could, and disappear into some city where no one knew her name. She could find work as a seamstress or a shop girl, live in a small room and forget that she had ever had a different life. But that felt like dying. This ranch was all she had left of her father, of her mother who had passed when Helena was 10, of every dream they had ever held. To walk away would be to erase all of it, to admit that the men who had taken her father's life had also taken hers. She could not do it. She would not. The decision settled in her chest like a stone, heavy but solid. She would find a way to keep the ranch. She would learn to do the work her father had done. She would survive. But first, she needed help. She needed someone who knew cattle and horses and the 100 other things she had never paid attention to because her father had always been there to handle them. She needed a ranch hand, someone strong and capable. The problem was that she had no money to pay anyone. Helena closed the ledgers and walked outside, looking at the land that stretched in all directions. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if she had the heart to notice. The cattle were scattered across the southern pasture, dark shapes against the dying light. The barn needed repairs. The fences needed mending. There was so much work, and she was just one person. "I am not strong enough for this," she whispered to the empty air. The admission felt like failure, like proof that everyone in town was right to doubt her. The next morning, she rode into Fort Stockton with a list of supplies she could not afford and a determination she did not feel. The town was busy with the usual traffic of ranchers, soldiers from the fort, and travelers heading west. She tied her horse outside the general store and went in, knowing that people would stare and whisper. They did. She felt their eyes on her as she moved through the aisles, picking up flour and coffee and other necessities. Sarah Chen, the shopkeeper's wife who had emigrated from San Francisco, gave her a sympathetic smile but said nothing. When Helena brought her purchases to the counter, Mr. Chen tallied them up with a grave expression. $12.40, he said quietly. She counted out the money, watching her small reserves dwindle further. As she gathered her packages, Mr. Chen cleared his throat. "Miss Dalton, if you need credit, we can work something out. Your father was always good for his debts." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. I will keep that in mind." Outside, she was loading her supplies onto her horse when she heard a voice behind her. "Helena Dalton." She turned to find a man standing there, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair and eyes the color of stormy skies. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt, and something about the way he carried himself spoke of competence and danger in equal measure. He looked to be in his late 20s, with a face that was handsome in a rough, weathered way. "Who is asking?" "Name is Wade Vance." "I heard your father passed, and I am sorry for your loss." His voice was low and sincere, with a slight drawl that marked him as a Texan. "I also heard you might be looking for help with the ranch." She studied him warily. "Where did you hear that?" "Small town. Word travels." He shifted his weight, and she noticed he moved with a slight limp. "I have been working ranches since I was 14. I know cattle, horses, and just about everything else that needs doing. I am looking for steady work. I cannot pay you." The words came out flat, matter of fact. There was no point in pretending otherwise. "I heard that too." He met her eyes steadily. "I was thinking we could work out a different arrangement. Room and board plus a percentage of the profits once the cattle are sold. If you go under, I get nothing. If you succeed, I get paid." It was too good to be true, which meant there had to be a catch. "Why would you do that? You could get steady wages anywhere." Wade looked away toward the distant hills. "Let us just say I have my reasons. I need a place to stay for a while, somewhere quiet. Your ranch fits the bill." There was a story there, something he was not saying. Helena knew she should press for details, should demand to know exactly what kind of trouble he was running from. But she also knew she was desperate, and desperate people did not have the luxury of being particular. "You understand I do not know anything about running a ranch," she said. "My father never taught me. He always said there would be time for that later. Then I will teach you." Wade turned back to her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. It was not pity exactly, but something like understanding. "You do not have to do this alone, Miss Dalton." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere was exactly what he seemed, a capable ranch hand looking for work. But she had learned in the past few days that the world was not kind to women alone, and trust was a luxury she could not afford. "I will think about it," she said. "Fair enough." He touched the brim of his hat. "I will be staying at the boarding house on Main Street if you decide you want the help. But do not wait too long. You have cattle that need tending, and from what I saw riding in, your fences are not going to hold much longer." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing in the street with her packages and 100 questions. She watched him go, noting the way people stepped aside for him, the way his hand never strayed far from his gun. Whatever Wade Vance was running from, it was something serious. But then again, she was running from something too. From the knowledge that she was not strong enough, smart enough, or capable enough to do what needed to be done. From the fear that she would lose everything her father had built, that his death would be for nothing. Helena rode back to the ranch with Wade's offer circling in her mind like a hawk. She spent the rest of the day trying to do the work that needed doing, but everything took twice as long as it should have. She broke a fence post trying to hammer it in, spilled half a bucket of feed, and nearly got kicked by the mare when she tried to check her hooves. By the time the sun set, she was exhausted and discouraged, her hands covered in new blisters and her dress filthy with dust and sweat. She ate a cold supper and sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. The night was full of sounds she had never paid attention to before, the distant cry of coyotes, the rustle of wind through the grass, the creaking of the barn. Every sound made her jump, made her wonder if the men who had killed her father were coming back. "I cannot do this alone," she said aloud, and this time the admission felt less like failure and more like simple truth. The next morning, she rode back into Fort Stockton and found Wade Vance sitting on the porch of the boarding house, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up as she approached, his expression neutral. "I will take your offer," Helena said without dismounting. "Room, board, and a percentage of the profits. But I need to know what you are running from first." Wade set down his whittling knife and stood. "That is fair. I was a ranch foreman up in Colorado until 6 months ago. The owner's son took a dislike to me, thought I was getting too much say in how things were run. He tried to start a fight, and I put him on his back. Owner fired me on the spot and put out word that I was a troublemaker. Been hard to find work since." It was a plausible story, the kind of thing that happened all the time in the West, where pride and tempers ran hot. Helena wanted to believe it was the truth, even though she suspected there was more to it. "If you are lying to me, if you bring trouble to my ranch, I will shoot you myself," she said. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Yes, madam, I expect you would. Then gather your things. We have work to do." Wade collected his saddle and a small pack that seemed to contain everything he owned in the world. He mounted a sturdy bay gelding and followed her out of town, and Helena tried to ignore the whispers and stares that followed them. She knew what people were thinking, that she was a fool to bring a strange man to her ranch, that it was not proper, that she was courting disaster. Let them think what they wanted. She was out of options and out of time. They rode in silence for most of the journey, but as they crested the last hill and the ranch came into view, Wade spoke. "Your father built something good here. The bones are solid. We just need to put some muscle on them." "We have 4 weeks before the bank takes it all," Helena said. "I owe $300. Wade whistled low. "That is a tall order. How many head of cattle you got?" 47 last count. "That is enough if we can get them to market in good shape and the price is right. But it is going to be hard work, dawn to dusk." "I am not afraid of hard work." That was not quite true. She was terrified of hard work, of failing, of proving everyone right, but she was more terrified of giving up. "I can see that." Wade glanced at her, and there was something approving in his gaze. "Most women in your position would have folded already." "You have steel in you, Miss Dalton." "I do not feel like I have steel. I feel like I am held together with string and hope." "Then lean on me until you are stronger," Wade said simply. "That is what I am here for." The words settled into her chest, warm and unexpected. She did not know how to respond, so she just nodded and led him down to the ranch. They spent the rest of the day taking stock of everything. Wade walked the property with a critical eye, noting every broken fence, every loose board, every problem that needed solving. He was thorough and efficient, and Helena found herself trailing after him, trying to absorb everything he said. He spoke to her like an equal, explaining his reasoning, asking her opinion even when it was clear she had no idea what she was talking about. "Why are you being so patient with me?" she asked as they stood in the barn, looking at the tack that needed mending. Wade looked at her surprised. "Because you are the owner. This is your ranch, your decisions. I am just here to help you make them." "Most men would not see it that way. They would just take over, tell me what to do." "Most men are fools." He turned back to the saddles and bridles hanging on the wall. "My mother ran a ranch by herself for 5 years after my father died. I watched her work herself half to death because she did not think she could ask for help, thought it made her weak. She was the strongest person I ever knew, but she did not need to do it alone. Nobody does." There was an old pain in his voice, something that spoke of loss and regret. Helena wanted to ask more, but before she could, Wade had moved on, pointing out which pieces of tack could be salvaged and which needed replacing. They worked until darkness forced them to stop. Helena cooked a simple supper of beans and cornbread, and they ate at the kitchen table in awkward silence. She was intensely aware of him in her space, this stranger who had upended her solitary grief. He was too large, too male, too present. The house suddenly felt small. "There is a room at the back of the barn," she said as they finished eating. "It was for the hired man my father used to have. It is dusty, but there is a bed and a stove. That will do fine." Wade stood and gathered his dishes. "Thank you for the meal, Miss Dalton. You can call me Helena. If we are going to be working together, formality seems silly." "Helena, then." He said her name carefully like he was testing the weight of it. "You can call me Wade." After he left, the house felt emptier than it had before. Helena washed the dishes and banked the fire, then stood at the window, looking out at the barn where a light now glowed in the back room. She thought about what Wade had said, about leaning on him until she was stronger, and wondered if she would ever feel strong enough to stand on her own. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and strangely comforting. Wade woke her before dawn every morning, knocking on her door until she stumbled out in her work dress and boots. They would eat a quick breakfast, then head out to tackle whatever task he had planned for the day. He taught her how to mend fences properly, how to read the cattle and know which ones were healthy and which needed attention, how to handle a rope and ride with confidence. He was patient with her mistakes, firm when she needed correction, and never once made her feel foolish for not knowing things her father had never taught her. Helena learned quickly because she had no choice. Her hands grew calloused, her muscles ached, and her face tanned despite the bonnet she wore. She fell into bed each night too tired to think, which was a mercy because thinking meant remembering her father, meant facing the fear that still lived in her chest. But as the days passed, something began to change. She found herself looking forward to the mornings, to the way Wade would be waiting by the barn with coffee already made, to the sound of his voice as he explained the day's work. She noticed small things about him: the way he favored his left leg on cold mornings, the scar on his right hand that he never mentioned, the way he sang quietly to the horses when he thought she could not hear. He was kind to the animals, patient and gentle, and it made her wonder what kind of man he truly was beneath the guarded exterior. 2 weeks into their arrangement, they were moving the cattle to a new pasture when one of the steers broke away and headed for broken ground. Wade spurred his horse after it, but the terrain was treacherous, full of rocks and hidden holes. Helena watched in horror as his horse stumbled, throwing him hard. He hit the ground and did not get up immediately. She rode to him as fast as she dared, her heart pounding. "Wade, are you hurt?" He was sitting up by the time she reached him, rubbing his shoulder and cursing under his breath. "I am fine, just got the wind knocked out of me." "You are not fine, you can barely move your arm." She dismounted and knelt beside him, her hands hovering uncertainly. "Let me see." "It is nothing." But his face was pale and she could see the pain in his eyes. "Wade, let me help you." Her voice came out firmer than she felt. "You have been helping me for 2 weeks. Let me return the favor." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. She carefully helped him out of his shirt, trying not to notice the warmth of his skin, the muscles beneath. His shoulder was already starting to bruise, a dark purple spreading across his skin. "Can you move it?" she asked. He rotated his arm slowly, wincing. "It is not broken, just wrenched." "I will be fine in a day or 2. You are going back to the house to rest. We have cattle to move. The cattle can wait." Helena stood and offered him her hand. "Come on. For once in your life, let someone take care of you." Wade took her hand and she pulled him to his feet. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. Something passed between them, a recognition that made her breath catch. Then Wade stepped back, breaking the moment. "You are getting bossy," he said, but there was a smile in his voice. "I learned from the best." She helped him mount his horse, then gathered his shirt and led them both back to the ranch. She made him sit at the kitchen table while she prepared a poultice for his shoulder, something her mother had taught her years ago. As she worked, gently pressing the warm compress against his bruised skin, she was acutely aware of his eyes on her. "You do not have to do this," Wade said quietly. "I know." She focused on her task, not trusting herself to meet his gaze. "But you said I could lean on you until I was stronger. Maybe right now you need to lean on me." His hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his shoulder. "Thank you, Helena." The touch sent warmth racing up her arm. She pulled away, suddenly flustered. "I should check on the cattle, Helena." His voice stopped her at the door. "You are stronger than you think. You know that, right?" She looked back at him, this man who had appeared in her life at exactly the right moment, who had shown her patience and kindness when she had expected nothing from the world. "I am beginning to believe it." That night, she lay in bed thinking about the feel of his skin beneath her hands, the way he had looked at her in the kitchen. She knew she was developing feelings for Wade, knew it was dangerous and foolish and entirely inappropriate. He was her employee, a man she barely knew, someone who would move on once the debt was paid. But her heart did not seem to care about logic or propriety. It wanted what it wanted, and it wanted him. Over the next few days, Wade's shoulder healed, but something between them had shifted. They were more comfortable with each other, their conversations ranging beyond just ranch work. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his mother's determination and his father's gentle humor. She told him about her childhood, about the mother she barely remembered and the father who had tried so hard to give her a good life. "You miss Colorado?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I miss the mountains," Wade admitted, "but not the rest of it. That life was not mine, not really. I was always just working for someone else's dream." "What is your dream?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think it was having my own place, building something that belonged to me. But lately, I have been thinking maybe it is just finding somewhere I belong, people who matter." Helena's heart beat faster. "Have you found that?" Wade turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her feel exposed. "I think maybe I have." Before she could respond, a sound from the distance made them both freeze. Hoofbeats, multiple riders coming fast. Wade was on his feet in an instant, his hand on his gun. "Get inside," he said quietly. "Lock the door." "What is it?" "I do not know. But nobody rides this hard at night unless they are up to no good." Helena retrieved her rifle and stood beside him, her pulse racing. The riders came into view, 3 men on horseback, and her blood ran cold as she recognized the one in front. Jack Corrigan, the man who had killed her father. They pulled up in the yard and Corrigan smiled, his teeth white in the moonlight. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders with a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty in his eyes. His brothers flanked him, lean and dangerous looking. "Well, well," Corrigan said. "Little Helena Dalton, all alone on her daddy's ranch. Oh, wait, you are not alone, are you? Got yourself a new hand." "Get off my property," Helena said, proud that her voice did not shake. "Now, is that any way to greet visitors? We just came by to offer our condolences." Corrigan's smile widened. "Your daddy was a poor card player, but he died quick. That is a mercy, right?" Wade moved slightly, putting himself between Helena and the riders. "The lady asked you to leave. I suggest you do it. And who are you supposed to be? The hired gun?" Corrigan looked Wade up and down dismissively. "You are just a ranch hand. Stand aside before you get hurt." "I do not think I will." Wade's voice was calm, but Helena could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand hovered near his gun. "You have 3 seconds to turn around and ride out." 1. "You are making a mistake." Corrigan's hand dropped to his gun. 2. "Wade, do not." Helena grabbed his arm, terrified. "There are 3 of them. I know." He did not take his eyes off Corrigan. 3. Everything happened at once. Corrigan drew, but Wade was faster. The gun seemed to appear in his hand like magic, and the shot echoed across the ranch. Corrigan screamed and grabbed his hand, his gun falling to the dirt. His brothers reached for their weapons, but Wade already had them covered. "Next shot goes through someone's heart," Wade said calmly. "Your choice which one of you it is." The brothers froze, their hands still on their guns. Corrigan was cursing, cradling his bleeding hand. "You will pay for this," Corrigan snarled. "You do not know who you are dealing with." "I know exactly who I am dealing with. Cowards who murder unarmed men and threaten women." Wade took a step forward. "Now get off this property before I change my mind about letting you live." The brothers helped Corrigan into his saddle, and the 3 men rode off into the darkness, Corrigan's curses echoing behind them. Helena stood frozen, her rifle still in her hands, her whole body shaking. "Helena." Wade touched her shoulder gently. "It is okay, they are gone. You could have been killed." The words came out strangled. "There were 3 of them, and you just... I was not going to let them hurt you." He took the rifle from her hands and set it aside, then pulled her into his arms. "I will never let anyone hurt you." Helena buried her face in his chest and let herself shake. His arms were strong around her, his heart beating steady beneath her ear. She felt safe for the first time since her father died, protected and cared for in a way that made her throat tight with emotion. "Who are you really?" she whispered. "Ranch hands do not shoot like that." Wade was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with old pain. "I was a Texas Ranger for 6 years. I left the service 8 months ago after my partner was killed. The owner's son in Colorado, the story I told you, that was not a lie. But I left out the part about why I was working as a ranch foreman instead of wearing a badge. I could not do the job anymore, not after losing him. I thought maybe I could find peace doing honest work, but the past has a way of following you." Helena pulled back to look at him. "You have been lying to me this whole time." "Not lying, just not telling the whole truth." He met her gaze steadily. "I am sorry. I should have been honest from the start. If you want me to leave, I will understand." She thought about it, about the deception and the danger he had brought to her door. But she also thought about the past 2 weeks, about everything he had taught her and all the ways he had helped her become stronger. She thought about the way he had stepped between her and Corrigan without hesitation, ready to die to protect her. "I do not want you to leave," she said. "I want you to stay and help me finish what we started. Helena, but no more secrets. If we are going to do this, I need the truth." "Fair enough." Wade stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "The truth is that Corrigan and his brothers are not going to let this go. I just humiliated him, and men like that do not forget. They will come back, probably with more men. You need to go into town, stay with the Morrisons or someone else until this blows over." "No," the word came out fierce. "This is my ranch. I am not running away." "Helena, be reasonable. These men are killers. So are you, apparently." She crossed her arms. "You are a Texas Ranger, or you were. You know how to handle them. Teach me." "Teach you what? How to kill a man?" Wade looked horrified. "No, absolutely not." "Then teach me how to defend myself. Teach me how to shoot properly, how to watch my back, how to survive." Helena stepped closer to him. "You said I could lean on you until I was stronger. Help me get strong enough that I do not need to run." Wade looked at her for a long moment, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. Finally, he sighed. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met. I will take that as a compliment." It was not meant as one, but there was affection in his voice. "All right, tomorrow we start your training. But you have to promise me that if things get too dangerous, you will listen to me. No arguments." "I promise." They stood there in the moonlight, and Helena became aware of how close they were standing, of the way Wade was looking at her like she was something precious and terrifying. She thought he might kiss her, hoped he would, but instead he stepped back and picked up his hat. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." Helena watched him walk back to the barn, then went inside and locked the door. She leaned against it, her heart still racing, and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Wade was a Texas Ranger. Corrigan was going to come back. She was in more danger than ever, but she was not alone. That was the thought she held on to as she finally climbed into bed. Whatever was coming, she would face it with Wade at her side. True to his word, Wade began training her the next morning. They started with shooting, Wade setting up targets and teaching her how to hold the pistol properly, how to aim and breathe and squeeze the trigger instead of pulling it. She was terrible at first, missing the targets entirely, but Wade was patient. "You are tensing up," he said, standing behind her and adjusting her stance. His hands on her waist sent shivers through her that had nothing to do with fear. "Relax. The gun is a tool, not an enemy." "Easy for you to say," Helena muttered, but she tried to do as he instructed. This time her shot hit the target, not center mass, but close enough. "I did it." "You did." Wade's smile was genuine and warm. Keep practicing. Muscle memory is everything. They spent hours at it, until her arms ached and her ears rang from the sound of gunfire. But by the time the sun reached its peak, Helena was hitting the targets more often than not, and she felt a surge of pride she had not experienced in weeks. "You are a good teacher," she said as they walked back to the house for lunch. "You are a good student." Wade paused at the door. "Helena, about last night, I meant what I said. I will not let anyone hurt you. I know." She touched his arm, feeling bold. "But it is not just about protection, is it? You care about me." Wade looked at her and she saw the truth in his eyes before he said a word. "Yes, I care about you. More than I should, probably. You are my employer and I am just a drifter trying to outrun his past. This is not a good idea." "I do not care if it is a good idea." Helena moved closer, her heart pounding. "I care about you too, Wade. I think I have since that first day when you offered to help me." "Helena," he reached up and touched her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "You deserve better than a broken man with ghosts. You are not broken. You are healing just like I am." She covered his hand with hers. "Maybe we can heal together." Wade pulled her close and kissed her, and Helena felt like the world had suddenly righted itself. His lips were gentle on hers, asking rather than demanding, and she answered by wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "This is still a bad idea," Wade said, but he was smiling. "Probably." Helena smiled back. "But I am done playing it safe." They spent the rest of the day working together, but everything felt different now. There was an ease between them that had not been there before, a sense of rightness. Helena caught herself watching Wade as he worked, admiring the way he moved, the strength in his hands, the concentration on his face. Once, she caught him watching her too, and the heat in his gaze made her blush. That evening they sat on the porch together, close enough that their shoulders touched. Wade told her more about his time as a ranger, about the partner he had lost, and the guilt he still carried. Helena listened and held his hand, offering comfort without judgment. "His name was Thomas," Wade said quietly. "We were tracking a gang of rustlers into the hill country. I wanted to wait for backup, but Thomas said we should move in while we had the element of surprise. I let him convince me, and we walked into an ambush. He took 3 bullets before I could get him to cover. He died in my arms, and the last thing he said was that it was not my fault, but it was. I should have insisted we wait." "You made the best decision you could with the information you had," Helena said. "That is all anyone can do." "Thomas knew the risks. He would not want you carrying this guilt forever." "How did you get so wise?" Wade looked at her with something like wonder. "I am not wise. I am just a woman who has lost people too. I know what it is like to wish you had done things differently, to replay every moment and wonder if you could have changed the outcome." She squeezed his hand. "But my father would not want me to spend my life drowning in what-ifs. He would want me to live, to build something good. I think Thomas would want the same for you." Wade pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Thank you." They sat together as the stars came out, and for the first time since her father's death, Helena felt something like happiness. It was fragile and new, but it was real. She had found someone who saw her as strong and capable, who believed in her even when she doubted herself. Wade was helping her become the woman she needed to be, and maybe she was helping him find his way back from the darkness he had been lost in. But their peace was not meant to last. 3 days later, Pete Morrison came riding up to the ranch, his horse lathered and his face grave. "Helena, Wade, you need to get out of here," he said as soon as he dismounted. "Corrigan has been in town, bragging about how he is going to burn this place to the ground. He has rounded up 6 or 7 men, real rough types. They were drinking at the saloon all yesterday, working themselves up. The sheriff is not going to do anything to stop them. Helena felt cold dread settle in her stomach. When are they coming? Tonight, probably. Maybe sooner. Pete looked between them. I brought my buckboard. Grab what you can and come stay with us. Once they have burned the place and moved on, you can rebuild. No, Wade stood, his jaw set. If we run now, we will be running forever. Corrigan will not stop until someone stops him. You cannot fight 8 men, Pete said. That is suicide. Maybe, but I am not letting him take everything Helena has worked for. Wade looked at Helena. It is your choice. We can leave and be safe, or we can stay and fight. But I need you to understand that if we stay, there is a good chance we will not survive. Helena thought about her father, about the life he had built and the dreams he had held. She thought about the past weeks, about all the work she and Wade had put into saving this place. She thought about running away and living the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, always wondering if today would be the day Corrigan caught up with them. We stay, she said. This is my home. I am not giving it up without a fight. Pete shook his head. You are both crazy. But I expected nothing less. He paused, then added, my sons and I, we will stand with you. You are our neighbors, and we do not abandon our own. Pete, you have a family to think about, Helena protested. You cannot risk them. My boys are grown men, and they know how to shoot. We will not let you face this alone. Pete's expression was firm. Besides, my wife would never forgive me if I left you to fight by yourselves. We will be back before sundown with every gun we can round up. After Pete left, Helena and Wade spent the day preparing for battle. They moved supplies into the house, barricaded the windows, and filled every bucket they had with water in case of fire. Wade checked and rechecked their weapons, making sure everything was loaded and ready. Are you scared? Helena asked as they worked. Terrified, Wade admitted. But I am not going to let fear stop me from doing what is right. Your father died because nobody stood up to Corrigan. That ends tonight. As the sun began to set, Pete returned with his 2 sons and 3 other ranchers from the surrounding properties. They were rough men, weathered by hard work and harder lives, but their eyes were determined. We heard what Corrigan has been saying, one of them said. We are tired of men like him thinking they can take what they want. It is time someone taught him different. They took up positions around the ranch, some in the barn, others in the house. Wade put Helena in an upstairs bedroom with a rifle and strict instructions to stay down unless absolutely necessary. I did not train you just to have you die tonight, he said, cupping her face in his hands. If things go bad, you run. You hear me? You take a horse and you ride to town and you do not look back. Wade, promise me, Helena. I need to know you will survive this, even if I do not. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. I promise. But you better survive too, because I love you and I am not done with you yet. Wade's eyes widened. Helena, I know it is fast and I know it is probably foolish, but I do not care. I love you, Wade Vance. I think I have since you offered to help me that first day. And I need you to know that. Before he kissed her, hard and desperate, and she clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you too, he whispered. More than I thought I could love anyone. When this is over, if we are both still standing, I am going to marry you, if you will have me. Yes, Helena laughed through her tears. Yes, I will have you, you foolish man. He kissed her once more, then headed downstairs to join the others. Helena took up her position by the window, her rifle in her hands, and watched the darkness for signs of movement. They did not have to wait long. Around midnight, the sound of hoofbeats announced the arrival of Corrigan and his men. There were 8 of them, just as Pete had said, all armed and clearly drunk on whiskey and violence. They rode into the yard whooping and hollering, firing shots into the air. "Helena Dalton." Corrigan's voice rang out. "You and your hired gun have until I count to 10 to come out with your hands up. Otherwise, we burn this place to the ground with everyone inside." Wade stepped out onto the porch, his hands away from his guns. "Let the others go, Corrigan. This is between you and me. You shot my hand. You humiliated me in front of my brothers." Corrigan's face was twisted with rage. "I am going to make you pay for that, and then I am going to take everything that little girl loves and destroy it. You are welcome to try." Wade's voice was calm. "But you should know there are 10 rifles pointed at you and your men right now. You start shooting and you are all dead men." Corrigan laughed. "You are bluffing. There is just you and the girl. Think that if it makes you feel better." Wade crossed his arms. "But I was a Texas Ranger for 6 years, and I know how to set a trap. You rode right into this one." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Corrigan's face. He looked around the yard, trying to see into the shadows. Then his pride overrode his caution, and he reached for his gun. "Kill them all," he shouted. The night exploded into gunfire. Helena fired from her window, trying to hit the dark shapes below. She saw one of Corrigan's men go down, then another. The barn lit up with muzzle flashes as Pete and his sons fired. Wade moved across the porch with deadly efficiency, his guns barking. It was chaos and noise and the smell of gunpowder, and Helena had never been so terrified in her life. Then she saw Corrigan break away from the fight and head toward the house. He kicked in the front door and disappeared inside. Helena's blood ran cold. Wade was still outside, pinned down by gunfire. Corrigan was in the house and he was coming for her. She heard his boots on the stairs, heavy and deliberate. She stood and pointed her rifle at the bedroom door, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it steady. "Little Helena," Corrigan called out, "where are you hiding? Come out and make this easy on yourself." The door burst open and Helena fired. The shot went wide, splintering the door frame. Corrigan laughed and advanced on her, his gun raised. Helena fired again, and this time she saw him stagger. But he did not go down. He fired back, and she felt something hot tear across her arm. She cried out and dropped her rifle. Corrigan grabbed her by the hair and dragged her toward the door. "We are going to walk out of here together, and your cowboy is going to watch while I put a bullet in your head." Helena struggled, but he was too strong. They were at the top of the stairs when Wade appeared below, his face white with fury. "Let her go, Corrigan. Or what?" "You will shoot through her to get to me." Corrigan pressed his gun to Helena's temple. "Drop your weapons, or she dies right now." Wade lowered his gun slowly, his eyes never leaving Helena's. She saw the calculation in his gaze, saw him weighing options. Then his eyes flickered to something behind Corrigan, and she understood. Helena threw her weight backward, slamming into Corrigan and knocking him off balance. Wade's shot rang out in the same instant, and Corrigan screamed. His grip on Helena loosened, and she wrenched herself free, stumbling down the stairs. Wade caught her and pushed her behind him as Corrigan fell, his gun clattering away. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. In the sudden silence, they could hear groaning and cursing. Wade cautiously moved to the door, Helena right behind him. The yard was full of bodies, some moving and some not. Pete and his sons emerged from the barn, their faces grim. "We got 5 of them," Pete reported. 3 dead, 2 wounded. The other 3 ran off. Wade nodded and looked down at Corrigan, who was clutching his leg and cursing. "You are going to stand trial for murder," Wade said. "And this time, the law is not going to let you slip away." "You cannot prove anything," Corrigan spat. "I do not have to. There are 8 witnesses to you attacking this ranch and threatening Miss Dalton. That is more than enough to hang you." Wade turned to Pete. "Can you and your boys watch him and the others while I take Helena into town? She needs a doctor." "I am fine," Helena protested, but Wade was already looking at her arm where blood had soaked through her sleeve. "You are not fine. You have been shot." His voice was rough with emotion. "You are going to see a doctor even if I have to throw you over my saddle to get you there." Helena was too exhausted to argue. She let Wade help her onto his horse and he swung up behind her, holding her carefully against his chest. As they rode toward town, she could feel him shaking. "I thought I lost you," he said into her hair. "When I saw him with that gun to your head, I thought, but you did not lose me. I am right here." She leaned back against him, drawing strength from his warmth. "We survived, Wade. We won." "You saved yourself," he said. "When you knocked him off balance, that was all you. You were strong enough when it mattered." Helena thought about that as they rode through the darkness. She had been strong enough, not just because Wade had taught her, but because she had found strength in herself that she had not known existed. She had faced her fear and her grief, had stood up to men who wanted to destroy her, and she had survived. More than survived. She had won. The doctor in Fort Stockton cleaned and bandaged her wound, declaring it a graze that would heal cleanly. By the time they left his office, the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Helena and Wade stood on the wooden sidewalk, exhausted and filthy and alive. "I meant what I said," Wade told her, "about marrying you if you still want to." "I want to." Helena took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "But I have conditions." "Of course you do," he smiled. "What are they?" "We run the ranch together as partners, equal say in all decisions, and you teach me everything you know so I never have to feel helpless again." "Done." Wade pulled her close, ignoring the scandalized looks from the few townspeople out at this early hour. "Anything else?" "Yes, kiss me." He did, right there on Main Street, and Helena did not care who saw. She had spent too long caring what other people thought, trying to live up to expectations that were not her own. From now on, she was going to live for herself, for Wade, for the life they would build together. The trial of Jack Corrigan and his surviving men was swift. With so many witnesses and the evidence of their attack, the jury took less than an hour to find them guilty. Corrigan was sentenced to hang, his brothers to long prison terms. Helena testified at the trial, standing tall and steady as she told the court exactly what had happened, both the night of the attack and the night her father had died. When it was over, she felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Justice had been done. With the threat of Corrigan gone, Helena and Wade threw themselves into the work of saving the ranch. They rounded up the cattle, repaired the damage from the gunfight, and prepared for the drive to market. The wounds Helena had sustained healed, leaving only a small scar on her arm that she wore like a badge of honor. When they finally drove the cattle to market 3 weeks later, the price was good enough that Helena was able to pay off the bank debt with money left over. She stood in the bank manager's office, signing the final papers that made the ranch truly hers, and felt a sense of accomplishment that brought tears to her eyes. "Your father would be proud," the bank manager said kindly. "He always believed this ranch could be something special." "It will be," Helena promised. "Wade and I are going to make sure of it." They were married in Fort Stockton's small church on a bright afternoon in late autumn. The church was packed with ranchers and townspeople who had come to witness the union of the woman who had defied all expectations and the former ranger who had helped her do it. Helena wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk, and Wade wore his best suit. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the marriage, the silence was absolute. "I love you," Wade whispered as they said their vows, "from this day until my last." "And I love you," Helena replied, her voice clear and strong. "For making me believe I could be strong, and for standing beside me while I learned." They sealed their marriage with a kiss that made the congregation cheer, then walked out of the church hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next together. The first year of their marriage was not easy. They worked from dawn until long after dark, building the ranch into something profitable. Helena learned to read the market, to judge cattle, to negotiate with buyers who did not take women seriously, until she proved she knew more than they did. Wade taught her everything he knew about ranching, and she surprised him by teaching him things she figured out on her own. They hired 2 hands to help with the work, good men who respected Helena as the owner and Wade as the foreman. The ranch prospered under their joint management, and by the second year, they were able to buy more land and expand the herd. But it was not all work. There were evenings on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about their dreams. There were mornings waking up wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for another day together. There were rides across the property, just the 2 of them, where they could be nothing but a man and a woman in love. In the spring of 1880, Helena discovered she was pregnant. She told Wade one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, going over the accounts. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the barn. "We are going to have a baby." He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "Helena, are you sure? The doctor confirmed it this morning. We have about 6 months. She laughed at his expression, the wonder and terror mixed together. "You are going to be a father, Wade Vance, and you are going to be a mother." He kissed her gently. "The best mother any child could hope for, because you are already the strongest woman I know." Their son was born in November, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. They named him Samuel, after Helena's father, and Wade held him with a tenderness that made Helena fall in love with him all over again. "I am going to teach him everything," Wade promised as he rocked the baby. "How to ride, how to work the land, how to be a good man. And I will teach him that strength comes in many forms," Helena added, looking at her small family with a heart so full it ached. "That asking for help is not weakness, and that the strongest people are the ones who lift each other up." The years that followed were full of hard work and deep joy. The ranch continued to grow, becoming one of the most successful in the region. Helena became known as a shrewd businesswoman, respected by the men who had once dismissed her. Wade served as a consultant for the Texas Rangers, helping them track outlaws while never straying far from home. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. When he was 3, Helena gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Rose, who inherited their mother's fierce independence and their father's steady calm. The house that had once been so empty and silent was now full of laughter and chaos and love. On the 10th anniversary of the night they first met, Wade and Helena stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching their children play in the yard. Samuel was teaching his sisters how to rope a fence post, his young voice earnest as he explained the proper technique. "You ever think about how different our lives could have been?" Helena asked, leaning against Wade's shoulder. "If you had not come to Fort Stockton that day, if I had given up and gone east, every day." Wade wrapped his arm around her waist. "And every day I thank God that I found you when I did. You saved me, Helena. I was lost and broken, and you gave me a reason to heal, a reason to believe I could be more than my past." "We saved each other," Helena corrected gently. "You taught me that I did not have to be strong all the time, that it was okay to lean on someone. And in learning to lean, I found my own strength. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. I love you." Wade turned her to face him, his hands framing her face. "I loved you when you were terrified and grieving. I loved you when you were learning to be fierce, and I love you now, as the woman who has built an empire from dust and determination. I will love you until the day I die and beyond. Helena kissed him, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude and partnership into it. Their children made gagging noises from the yard, and they broke apart laughing. "Come on, you little monsters," Wade called out. "Let us go check on the new foals." The children whooped and ran toward the barn, and Wade and Helena followed hand in hand. As they walked across the land they had built together, Helena thought about the frightened woman she had been a decade ago, sure she was not strong enough to face the world alone. She thought about Wade's words that had changed everything. "Then lean on me until you are." She had leaned on him, and in doing so, she had found her own strength. But more than that, she had learned that true strength was not about standing alone. It was about finding someone who would stand beside you, who would catch you when you fell and lift you when you faltered. It was about building something together that was greater than either of you could have created alone. The ranch stretched out before them, thousands of acres of possibility and promise. The cattle grazed peacefully, the horses ran free in the pasture, and the house stood solid and welcoming, full of the life they had made. It was everything her father had dreamed of and more, and Helena knew he would be proud of what she had accomplished. But more important than the land or the success was the family she had built. Wade, her partner in all things, who loved her with a steadiness that never wavered. Samuel, Emma, and Rose, 3 bright souls who would grow up knowing that they could be anything they dreamed. This was what mattered. This was what she had fought for on that terrible night when it seemed like everything was lost. As the sun set over the Texas landscape, painting the world in golds and purples, Helena Vance stood with her husband and watched their children laugh and play. She had started out afraid she was not strong enough, but Wade had believed in her until she could believe in herself. Together, they had built a life of purpose and love, and she knew that whatever challenges came, they would face them together. In the end, that was what strength really meant. Not facing the world alone, but knowing you had someone who would stand beside you through every storm. And Helena had found that someone in a former Texas Ranger with haunted eyes and a patient heart, a man who had seen her at her weakest and helped her find her power. She had been strong enough all along. She had just needed someone to believe in her first. And now, 10 years later, with a thriving ranch, a loving husband, and 3 beautiful children, Helena finally understood what her father had been trying to teach her all those years ago. Life was not about facing everything alone. It was about finding the people who would stand with you, who would catch you when you fell and celebrate with you when you soared. She had found that in Wade, and together they had built something beautiful. Not just a ranch, but a family, a legacy, a love that would endure long after they were gone. Their children would grow up strong and capable, knowing that they came from people who had faced impossible odds and won, not through individual strength, but through partnership and love. As night fell and they herded the children back to the house for supper, Helena took one last look at the land that had tested her so thoroughly. She had arrived here broken and terrified, sure that she would fail. But she had not failed. She had thrived. And it had all started with a cowboy who had offered to let her lean on him until she was strong. She had leaned, she had learned, and she had loved. And in the end, that had made all the difference.